Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. You're listening to our Dungeons and Dragons game. I'm your host, the Dungeon Master, or DM for short. In today's story, prologue is that Arthur's Spelljammer finally makes it into space. Um, it's taken a couple of adventures to get it ready, but it is finally space worthy. So it begins its maiden flight. The plot of the story is that the first place that the Spelljammer goes is a moon, and it is covered in cities. It lands there to see if they can get some more supplies. One of the big things in Spelljammer is you need enough food and stuff like that to be able to survive these very long journeys, right? So being able to stop someplace where there's air and get more food, all that stuff is like very, very important. At any rate, when they land, there's a group of knights called the Hippogypians, and they ride on the backs of giant vultures. And so they escort Arthur and his crew to meet their king, whose name is Endymion. So Arthur meets Endymion and introduces himself as King Arthur. And the Moon King asks what planet he's the king of. And Arthur says, I didn't rule a whole planet, actually, just Camelot and, all that. Technically, Arthur was the emperor of the Roman Empire there at the end because he had gone to war with them and won. And he left someone in his stead to rule the Roman Empire for him. But, nonetheless, it's not the entire Earth, right? So Endymion suggests that by spell jamming standards, Arthur is not a true king then. So I thought that was interesting that Arthur seems like such a big deal on Earth, but then when he gets out into space, now he's kind of a small fish, or like he was a big fish in a small pond. Now he's a relatively small fish in this vast ocean, right? So at any rate, for now, Arthur quits referring to himself as King Arthur, and he just goes back to being called Arthur. And that's kind of how this whole game started. We just called him Artie, if you saw those adventures. At any rate, so Endymion tells Arthur that his moon kingdom is about to be attacked by the kingdom of the sun. Endymion says that the moon kingdom needs heroes to defend it. But when he describes the harsh nature of the sun kingdom, Arthur can't help but draw sort of a parallel to the idea of like a sunburn. Um, I don't know if you, dear listener, have ever read Canterbury Tales. I always remember a story in it about a woman who was unfaithful. And so the punishment was her husband, I think, claims to be her lover, gets her to go up in this tower, and there's sort of a trap door so that once you're up there or whatever, he basically says, take your clothes off in the tower and then go to the roof. And it's so high up, people can't see the roof. Um, and then I'll meet you there. And so she does this, and when he goes there, he just locks that trap door. So, and she was supposed to meet her lover at sunrise or something. So the idea is when the sun comes up, it is awful. They get really descriptive. Chaucer does in that story about how it hurts her, and that's like her punishment for adultery, you know. Um, at any rate, so there's this parallel with the Sun Kingdom, right? At any rate, so the PCs agree to defend the Moon Kingdom. So they're invited to a feast and treated as honored guests while they wait on this battle, to arrive. And it's a very strange place. Endymion himself is human, but he is the only human here. And so he reacts positively to Arthur just as a fellow human. But he starts talking about how unusual the Moon Kingdom is for a lot of different reasons. One is the people here have leaves for ears. Another thing is they give birth. Well, I should back up a page here. So the Moon Men are really weirded out by the fact that Arthur has an all-female crew because there are no women on the moon here. They explain that older men take younger men as spouses. So the older man is kind of the dominant one. And the younger men here can get pregnant in their leg. The basically the calf muscle is where they would carry a child and it swells up and then their leg gives birth. So it's a very strange kind of a situation they have going on here. And then when the older man dies, his younger spouse is now older, right? And then he takes a spouse that's younger than him. So the process is always repeating itself. Um, at any rate, Endymion also mentions that there's a section of his kingdom that is sort of like the land of the lost, where for reasons unknown, things from elsewhere in time and space get summoned to this area, right? So Arthur is very curious about that. He asks if he can check it out, and the Moon King is like, "Yeah, sure, of course." So after the um the feast is over, the next day, Arthur and his crew go to this place, and it's kind of like a junkyard. And we described a lot of Easter eggs, and a lot of the stuff was nostalgic, was the theme. So, for instance, they found a jukebox from a Pizza Hut. So it's like an 80s Pizza Hut jukebox. They found if you remember the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, the kids go on a ride and get swept away to the world of Dungeons and Dragons, right? But when they arrive, the vehicle they had been in, which is kind of like roller coaster cars. I mean, really, it's like a weird mashup of a roller coaster and like the Tunnel of Love, where traditionally, is at least as far as I'm familiar, a Tunnel of Love is usually more of like a little boat shaped like a swan or something. The kids were on like a roller coaster that then goes through like a tunnel of love. But at any rate, the point is that roller coaster is here. Um, there are power generators from like further into the future than where Arthur is from. He's able to splice some wires and stuff and actually get the jukebox to work. So they're listening to music from his world. And that's the first time most people here are hearing this, right? He finds uh old-timey lights, and these are more like, I don't know if it would be like 1940s, 1960s, but like a lot of times you'd see them in like a Christmas tree lot. They'd have those big strings, not colored, like all the lights are white, but it's like an older style of light bulb. The point is, he finds some of those and is kind of stringing them up and stuff. And it was a really cool sequence, right? And at any rate, so he checks back with Endymion and expresses interest in this stuff because it has meaning to him. It's from his home, which he misses horribly. Um, and Endymion doesn't care. To him, it's just like crap that keeps showing up, right? So he's like, yeah, you can like take it all if you want. As long as you help me fight, against the kingdom of the sun. So Arthur's like, cool. At any rate, so the PCs are in this junkyard place, and they keep looking the whole time because more and more stuff keeps showing up, right? And while they're looking around here, something comes up out of the ground, and it's this gigantic monster called a Lavos. And it has been here for a really long time, and it can sense the movement in the junkyard. So think of the old movie Tremors, basically, right? So this thing is it's like a colossal porcupine in a way. So it comes up and like junk is like falling off of its like gigantic spikes and stuff, right? And so the PCs fight it. And the outside of it is very tough. They end up going inside of its body, doing kind of the Fantastic Voyage thing, and they kill it from within. At any rate, afterwards they encounter a half Lavos woman named Amarra Drakontos, aka Harwen. And she has been sort of summoned to this junkyard too. Um, and she looks like a Dragon Ball character. Her hair is kind of reminiscent of Sonic the Hedgehog. Yeah, this is the picture here that I'm using for the art this week. At any rate, no sooner than she joins the party, the Sun Kingdom attacks. And the first wave of attackers are colossal spiders who weave a massive web in space, which serves as sort of like, in a way, it's the battlefield because the webs are really weird, where they're only sticky when the user wants them to be sticky, and the rest of the time you can just run across them and they're like stiff, right? So then the characters can run up these spider webs to go fight up there if they want. Um, so it is a battlefield, but then it is also transportation because one of the things that the Sun King does is he has, which his name is Phaethon, by the way. And Phaethon employs a lot of like giant insects of various sorts, right? And a lot of them have a humanoid character of some sort on the back riding the giant bug. So it's spiders that bring web lines down, and then there's giant ants walk on the webs to get to the moon's surface, right? There's giant fleas. Um, there are archers who ride on the backs of more giant insects, and um, this is a normally these things are tiny. They're similar to like a mosquito or a gnat, but again, this is like a huge. Like I'm reminded of a old '80s cartoon called Sectars, Warriors of Symbion. Very similar. At any rate, giants join in the fight. And they pluck. There's these like huge turnips that grow in the lunar soil. So they're pulling these things out of the ground like in Mario Brothers 2, right? And they're throwing those at people. Uh the Kingdom of the Sun also employs men who use giant mushrooms as shields. There are anthropomorphic dogmen that ride on winged unicorn or not unicorns, I'm sorry, acorns. It's just a giant acorn, but it has feathery wings, right? And so it's this massive battle, and it's just nuts. And if you're familiar with Spelljammer, I mean, Spelljammer is pretty nuts, actually. There's a lot of weird crap going on in Spelljammer, so I felt like this was on point, right? At any rate, the battle comes to an end at the end of the day. They fight all day long, and then what signals the end of the battle are like these alien donkeys, and so the braying sound that they make, that's like the war horns of the Sun Kingdom, basically. So everything stops at sunset, and there's clouds here, and they're like blood red, you know. And by the way, after the fighting is over, there are these flying centaurs that show up called a monitor, and they're also from Spelljammer. And Phaeton scolds them for not being here earlier like they promised. At any rate, so with the fighting over, diplomats come out and start sending messages back and forth. And the reasons for all this are incredibly petty. So the PCs get involved and are acting like diplomats. And so they kind of settle this whole dispute and they get everybody to stop warring and get along, right? So then at the end of the adventure, there's another big feast. Um, and the Kingdom of the Moon has flying frogs and they grill them on hot coals and eat them, right? Um, which that not so good, but they serve a beverage called Moon Dew, which is as addictive as it is delicious, right? It doesn't get you drunk or anything like that. It is just so good. You really, really, really want more of it. At any rate, so because of that, um, in addition to letting the PCs take anything they want from that junkyard, right? The Moon King also gives them like tons of moon dew where they got like wooden barrels of the stuff. Um, and then he also gives them as a thank you gesture for what they did. When you set it on the ground, it kind of looks like a small stone well with like a bottomless pit. But then over the top of it, it has this piece of glass. And so what this is a scrying device and you can move it. So the bottomless pit thing is like it's kind of like the inside of this magic item is bigger than the outside. So they're able to put it on the bridge of the Spelljammer. And again, it looks like a bottomless pit, but it's not because you could go down a deck and the ceiling there is fine. There's no hole in it or anything. But when you look into it, it looks like a bottomless hole. Um, but at any rate, so this scrying device acts kind of like the view screen on like the Enterprise in Star Trek. So it's for communication purposes. Which I thought was cool because it's always bothered me. I feel like ship to ship communication is a huge deal and it is completely lacking from Spelljammer. So I was really into that. And that's pretty much that. They leave. So then we get into the epilogue. And the epilogue is that Arthur and his all-female crew leave the moon and travel to a different world called Agnopolis. In here, the natives look kind of like a will-o-wisp, where it's like a globe of light. And they keep tabs on the people of the nearest planet, almost like guardian angels in a way. And they have a court of justice, and they have to go there and report on what's going on in the life of the person they're supposed to be watching over, right? And if they don't answer a summons to report, they are put to death by having their light extinguished. So the PCs don't hang out here very long, right? They hang out long enough to see what the deal is, and they don't want to stick around because it seems strict. But that's it. That's the epilogue, and they're back out in space again on their merry way. So I hope that you found this to be interesting. If so, please smash that like button. It really helps out the channel. Be sure that you're subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, all that jazz. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.